I'm completely and utterly depressed after hearing one presentation after the other, painting such a depressing picture that it's very rare that a conference like this has been so depressing and demoralizing, but this is the reality. The other thing is that there's been some criticism that the program has been too full, and perhaps this is true, but every presentation that has been made has been relevant and has been important, and the idea behind putting together this program was to bring to you and to those who will receive reports of this conference the way in which incitement to terror has developed from what it used to be in the olden days to something that's influenced by the technological developments that exist today, and something that's become a vital component of modern-day terror and needs to be dealt with. So I hope, on the one hand, apologizing for a very crammed agenda, but I think you'll agree with me that it's been an extremely interesting and filling agenda. Now, as we all know, the last week and a half, the news has all been about the danger, the nuclear danger from Iran. And we're seeing all sorts of statements, some responsible, some irresponsible, by leading politicians in Israel as to what the options are for Israel, the sort of stuff that one would never expect to see in the media. But I think that there's no lesser danger emanating from Iran, coming from the threats at deleting Israel from the map of the world. And I think the incitement to genocide, and it's been mentioned here, being openly and repeatedly carried out by Ahmadinejad, and nothing being done about it, I think this is something that indicates the absurdity of the international community today. He can openly call Israel a tumor. He can openly call for the destruction of the state of Israel, but nothing happens. Tzipi Livni can't land in London because she's afraid of a warrant for her arrest being requested from a British court. Ariel Sharon, we had to fight for a year and a half, 2 years, to get the Belgian court to stop a criminal proceeding against Ariel Sharon. This went through very quickly. The International Court of Justice very quickly was called upon to deal with Israel's security offense. But for 7 years, Ahmadinejad has been wandering around in New York, at Columbia University, in front of the United Nations, calling for the genocide of a member state of the United Nations, and nobody has done anything to prevent it. Nobody has initiated any action, any criminal action before the International Criminal Court, and as has been pointed out today, incitement to genocide is included in the statute of the International Criminal Court, but nobody has initiated any action in the Security Council or anywhere else to prevent this. And in fact, when I was ambassador in Canada, when I was a new ambassador to Canada, when Ahmadinejad made his first statements, I requested, on behalf of the government of Israel, I requested that the Canadian government initiate an action in the United Nations calling upon the Security Council ultimately to act in accordance with the statute of the International Criminal Law. The Canadian Minister of Justice and Attorney General was then Irwin Cotler, and I'm sure that, and I know that he would have been the first to take this up. But unfortunately, the then Canadian government, which wasn't very enthusiastic about helping Israel, unlike the present Canadian government, which is perhaps Israel's greatest friend today, the then government didn't have the capability of doing this by itself, and it couldn't get any support from the international community. So this is an absurd situation that year after year, Ahmadinejad freely comes to New York and speaks to the UN and speaks at various other campuses, but nothing is done about it. But even more absurd, I think, is the fact that whilst slavery is an international crime, piracy is an international crime, war crimes, crimes against humanity, genocide, all these are international crimes. But incitement to terror is not an international crime. There's no international convention that sets out incitement to terror as an international crime. As Yael said, and may I say, by the way, that Yael was my stagiaire in the Foreign Ministry, and I'm very proud that she's here, Dr. Yael Ronen, and it gives me great satisfaction to see that a stagiaire who was then very young, and is still very young, is here with us on the podium. That's being a diplomat. I once tried, together with my colleagues in the Foreign Ministry, to draft an international convention against suicide bombing. And I took this draft to Norway, I took it to India, I took it to the Turks, I took it to the Russians, and I took it to the Americans to try and get a group of like-minded states to propose it as another anti-terrorism convention in the United Nations, knowing that if Israel presents it by itself, then it's dead on arrival. The Americans sent me packing simply because one of the major provisions in that draft convention was incitement to carry out a suicide bombing. It would be very difficult to take criminal action against a suicide bomber who's already enjoying his 72 virgins and whatever else in heaven. And so the only elements that could be proceeded against in a convention on suicide bombing would be accessories before the fact and accessories after the fact, including the very people that incited the bomber to do what he did. But the Americans said, no, this would never pass Congress because it's a violation of the First Amendment. And it became very evident then that any of these attempts to criminalize incitement, we will constantly meet up with this constitutional problem, which is not just in the United States, but also throughout other countries, especially in Europe. And so we found ourselves facing this very, very difficult challenge. And on the other hand, we came to the conclusion that we have to do something, because what we've seen today, whether it's the Facebook or YouTube or Al Jazeera or The Guardian or the BBC or the United Nations or Saudi Arabia or Russia, or the type of incitement that's going on all over the world, is using modern technology to get to millions of public. The Danes saw it with the publication of the cartoons, which brought about a terrible wave of violence. In Spain, they've seen it. In New York, they've seen terror originating from incitement. London, in Oslo, in Istanbul, in Ottawa. Not many people know, but the Canadians 3 years ago caught a group of people of Muslims who were intending to kidnap the Prime Minister and cut his head off. So that nobody is immune to this, and today, with the press of a button, it's possible to incite in every way possible. And so we decided that it's vitally important now to deal with the issue of incitement and to try and find the very fine grey line between incitement to terror and freedom of speech, and to try and distinguish between the two so that one won't interfere with the other. And so we came up, I drafted this draft international convention for the prevention of incitement to terror. Now, having worked for 4 years as an assistant legal counsel of the United Nations, I became very familiar in drafting in UN language, in UNese. And anybody who reads this draft convention, if you don't fall asleep, then you'll realize that this is classical UN language. This is the way these conventions are drafted in the UN. And I deliberately wanted this to be in UN language, because ultimately it has to be a convention that will go through the procedures within the international community for acceptance as an international convention. And basically it's composed of the classical components, the preambular paragraphs that set out basically why there was a need to draft this convention. And here I've put in over 20 preambular paragraphs, copying or cutting and pasting or adapting them from a whole series of previous international instruments. And just to give you a brief list, and it's not a complete list, there's the Terrorist Bombing Convention, the Convention on Financing Terrorism, the Draft International Convention on the Suppression of Terrorism, the UN Global Counter-Terrorism Strategy of 2006 and Plan of Action, the Council of Europe Framework Convention on the Prevention of Terrorism 2005, the Durban Review Conference 2009, Outcome Document, Security Council Resolution 1624 from 2005, the International Convention on Civil and Political Rights, the Convention on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda, the Akayesu judgment, and a whole series of Security Council resolutions that detail different types of incitement, and of course Yael Ronen's brilliant article on this issue. And so what I tried to do was, after the preamble, simply to build an all-embracing provision criminalizing incitement to terror. Now, I know that there are many lawyers and others, and nobody's perfect, who can criticize and who can proffer suggestions for better drafting. And this is what I want to encourage. This is a first draft. It's a sort of what's called in Chinese a cholent. I tried to put everything in it. I tried to take the criticisms of Yael Ronen, of the Security Council Resolution 1624, and I tried to take from all these sources and build up a definition of incitement to commit an act of terror, which will be all-inclusive. It might be a too low a profile for some, it might be a too high a profile for others. And for this reason, I'll be very happy to establish a working group within the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs of anybody who would be interested in proposing amendments or changes or adaptations of this text within the next month or so that we can establish a second draft which will then be ready for presentation. And now the most important article here is Article 1, which sets out the actual offense. And I just refer you to Article 1, Paragraph 3, and I'll very briefly read it because this is the center of the whole convention. And it says, for the purposes of this convention, quote, incitement to commit an act of terror, unquote, means directly or indirectly calling upon, provoking, urging, instigating, encouraging, advocating, or persuading others, whether groups or persons, members of the population or the public at large, to initiate, organize, participate, or engage in an act or acts of terror against any person, group of persons, or members of any religious, national, or ethnic group, whether such conduct, whether or not directly advocating terrorist offenses, causes a danger that one or more of such offenses may be committed. Now this is classical UNEs. This is a very long sentence. It's a very complex legal construction, and it certainly needs a lot of thought, and it can certainly be improved, and I'm the first to admit this. And therefore, but this is the center of the whole thing. This is meant to create the crime in international law that ultimately will become a provision of the statute of the International Criminal Court and criminalize incitement to terror. Afterwards, then, in paragraph 4, I simply define what this is composed of, whether it's speeches, shouting, or threats uttered orally, or public gatherings, the sale of written material in public places or placards, the use of mass media, television, radio, internet, or other means of communication, including by employing broadcasts, publications, drawing images and speeches, public vilification or disparagement of a target group, etc. So I've tried in this Article 1 to pour everything into this crime of incitement to terror. And hopefully we'll be able to come up with something which will be taken seriously by the international community. I don't think any of us are under any illusion that this will be welcomed by the United Nations, pushed through the Legal Committee of the United Nations or the International Law Commission and adopted by the General Assembly or by some international conference within the next year or two. I think we would be deluding ourselves. But I think the mere fact that we have decided at the Jerusalem Center, together with the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung, to turn this into a hot issue in the international community, to present it to the Secretary General of the United Nations in New York, to take it to Europe, to take it to various other places throughout the world. I think the mere fact that we're now determined to make this a central point in the international legal action, I think this in itself is vitally important. And we're all hoping that there will be support and following, and it will generate discussion in the international sphere. So here we have it. This is the essence, this is the outcome of our discussions today. It's difficult to say, after hearing such a depressing series of realities, it's very difficult to say, well, we have the answer. This isn't going to end the type of incitement that we've heard today, that we've heard about today that's going on. It will perhaps cause states, cause the international community to think about the issue and perhaps to do something about it. Perhaps governments might be influenced to do something about it. But it's certainly not going to stop this type of incitement. And so, in concluding our conference today, I'd like to thank you all for being here. I'd especially like to thank Dori Gold and Chaya Hershkovitz. Dori Gold, the president of the Jerusalem Center, and Chaya, the chief administrative officer, for all the work that's been put into organizing this conference. I'd like to thank the head of the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung, Michael Meltes, and Hildegard, who's been working for many, many years with us, and we were really very appreciative, and especially of the very interesting statement that you made today, Michael. We thank you both and your staff for the important work. Thank you. Okay. I'd also like to thank the organizers, the people who've been working behind the scenes, Ahuva Wolk and Tomasz Berzi, for the important work that they've been doing, and for the people from the hotel who've worked so hard to make sure that we've all been fed and that we're all happy. Unfortunately, the agenda is exhausted, and so are we, and we haven't got any time for questions, but what we intend to do is, in the near future, to hold a session at the Jerusalem Center in order to develop the subject further and to complete the exercise with a view to bringing it up to date so that we can then take it to the United Nations. So again, thank you all very much, and I look forward to seeing you all again at future conferences.